Today we get a little bit of insight into the Sixers trade deadline plans. Should they buy or sell? We'll break it down a little bit from a cap perspective and talk about the decision they have coming up. And most importantly, we'll take a look at a few trade targets, including one sleeper target that I think would be perfect for this team. We'll break it all down, but welcome into Philly Take with RB. I'm RB. Do me a favor, like this video, subscribe to the channel. Really appreciate everybody who constantly taps in. You know, every like, comment, share, follow, subscribe, whatever platform you're tapping in on, it all helps the brand. So appreciate you guys and girls. And I want to start it off with Jared McCain, who had a report put out yesterday from Tim Bontemps saying that McCain had a successful surgery to repair a lateral meniscus tear and remains out indefinitely. So that kind of gives a little more clarification on the injury, right? Because you can remove, you can trim, or you can repair. So here I go with my Sixers medical knowledge, looking this stuff up. Recovery from a meniscus removal, aka meniscectomy, is typically faster than a meniscus repair, right? That's what Embiid had done last year. And it says most people are able to put weight on their knee fairly soon after surgery and return to normal activities within a few weeks, maybe even a month or two. But a meniscus repair, like Jared McCain had, could take several months for full recovery, requiring a longer period of rehab and limited weight bearing on the knee, depending on the severity. So, unfortunately, what this feels like is that Jared McCain is probably going to be out for like 3 months at least, maybe come back for the playoffs, which will take him out for most of the rest of the season, take him out of the Rookie of the Year campaign. It's just a very devastating injury. You got to feel for the guy. I mean, even if he does come back, will he look himself? Usually it takes time mentally with these knee injuries. So yeah, I just don't feel good about it, and it sucks. It really, really does suck. And then in addition to that, Joel Embiid with a sinus fracture will be reevaluated in 1 week. This came out a couple days ago. And now the question is, well, can Joel come back sooner than expected? And honestly, I think that is the pivot, you know, either way for where the Sixers need to make a decision. Like, I think that's the most important thing as they think about what to do in the coming weeks. Because if Joel Embiid's going to be out, you know, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, like we originally thought, then is there really a point to buy, to go all in, to try to right the ship here? If Joel Embiid can come back in a week, then, you know, maybe you can get back on track, win some games, and at least stay formidable. So I think the health of Joel Embiid in the long term versus the short term and how quick he can recover really should kind of guide the Sixers in their next decision. Obviously, if he does come back, it kind of feels like we've been walking on eggshells, like, hey, one little bad move or twist, and he's going down again, and then we're screwed. But anyway, let's talk about the Sixers trade deadline. Philly Sixers Galaxy put this little piece here on Twitter from Marc Stein of the Stein line. Stein says the Sixers are expected to, quote, prioritize as much roster and salary cap flexibility as possible as the February 6th trade deadline approaches. The luckless Sixers, who lost Joel Embiid and Jared McCain to new injuries, are expected to try to prioritize as much roster and salary cap flexibility as possible in the coming weeks as they try to avoid straying into the second apron luxury tax territory. So what does this mean? Well, it feels like they're not that confident in Embiid and McCain returning from injury, and we're kind of heading towards another cap space plan. Not exactly, because, you know, they literally had the roster strapped down to Embiid and Maxey this summer. They signed everybody, and here we are again. Yes, it is frustrating. First, I want to shout out to Keith Smith, who works over at Spot Track, and he put this chart out, which I've always come back to reference, because, you know, these new rules, the first apron, you know, the second apron, the penalties that come with it, it's a little bit confusing to try to remember and understand. So the one thing I want to keep an eye on here when we look at the first apron penalties, because that's where the Sixers are right now. They are actually in the first apron. Matter of fact, let me just show you here. That way we can get a little bit of a better understanding. The 76ers are above the tax line. They are into the first apron by $4.6 million, and they are $6.2 million under the second apron. As you get up to the second apron, the penalties become harsher. But right now they're in the first apron, and even before these rules, right, we've heard the Sixers try to duck the tax before, and they've tried to get below the tax line. So Will they try to get below the first apron? Well, we'll see how that plays out. But, we came into this season saying, hey, this is going to be the first time where they actually might even go in the second apron and be willing to push all the chips in and be willing to spend money from this ownership and actually try to win. But circumstances have changed. Here they are, and it's a tough situation. But anyway, in the first apron, the one thing to keep an eye on is using more than 100% in salary matching in a trade, AKA, just simplified down, the Sixers would have to send out more salary than they take back in a trade. And that puts a lot of restriction on where they are as a team. Because if you look at the 76ers cap table right now, I mean, we're kind of in a trial and error period with some of these new strategies from teams. There's been a couple groups here where, they try to build around three big stars, right? Paul George, Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey taking up most of the salary cap. We've seen that with, say, the Phoenix Suns. Let's look at their cap table for a second. The Suns, KD, 51 mil. Bradley Beal, 50. Devin Booker, 49. And obviously the Suns are in the second apron, so that's a little bit different. The Celtics just did this recently, and their contracts are going to kick in. But teams are still trying to decide, is that the best way to go? Or do you kind of rock with the two-star model and then put a couple really good high-level role players next to these guys, in the 20, 25, 30 million range? So anyway, that's kind of where we're at. And the Sixers are in the first apron, which means they would have to send out more salary than they get back in a trade. Now, I want to take a look at an article from Sixers Adam Aronson here on Philly Voice. I think he portrays it pretty well. And he talks about a couple trade targets. One of them is actually my sleeper target, so we'll get into that. But let's hear what he has to say on this piece. He says, not everybody is eligible to be traded just yet. The Sixers cannot trade Embiid because of the contract extension he signed in September. Kyle Lowry has the right to veto any trade this season, almost certainly taking him out of negotiations. Maxey and KJ are part of a small group of players who are not yet eligible to be traded, and they will become eligible on January 15th. So another thing to keep in mind is that on January 15th, the players that were re-signed by the Sixers in the offseason become eligible to be traded. The guys that were signed as free agents that were not on the team last year became eligible a few days ago on December 15th. So, the Caleb Martins of the world, those kinds of players are now eligible to be traded. So not everybody is, able to be moved just yet. And Joel Embiid cannot be traded. So we can throw that out the window, at least for this season. He says the Sixers can only absorb as much salary in a trade as they send out. For example, if they trade $5 million worth of salary, they could acquire up to $5 million worth of salary back. That's the first apron restriction that we just talked about. Yeah, I think when you look at the 76ers, that KJ contract is probably the most realistic one in terms of acquiring a decent player on a value contract. I mean, Andre Drummond's $5 million could be thrown in. Kelly Oubre's $8 million. I think those are the main three. Eric Gordon, who wants that? Kyle Lowry has a veto on his contract, so he's not going to allow himself to be traded anywhere else. He wants to finish his career here. Yabusele could definitely be thrown in, but, only $2 million, right? That's a really good value contract. What are you going to get back for that, right? That would have to be aggregated. So I think the Sixers are in a tough position if they want to make a big time move, right? Because I don't know who's taking on Paul George for $50 million. So that was the risk that they came in to the season knowing, and that's where they are at. Now, when we look back at this article, the one target he mentions is a guy we've discussed for quite some time, Dorian Finney-Smith. He's making just about $15 million this year. Definitely a gettable contract, but is it worth it? Let's look at Dorian Finney-Smith. He's averaging 11 points per game this season. He's shooting 45% from three. Not really much of like a movement shooter, just a spot up 3-and-D wing. His defense has, declined a little bit, but still a good perimeter defender. But he is getting up there in age, and he's making a lot of money. And do you view him as a guy that you would keep on this team moving forward? I think that's an interesting conversation to have. Is he worth it? I think he could come in and play, the small forward, the power forward. I think he could do different things. He's not an excellent rebounder, but he's a decent one. So definitely a guy to keep your eyes on, especially with the Nets moving off players. They just traded Dennis Schroeder. So, they're already starting to move pieces. Definitely keep your eyes on him. But another trade target that I think is much more likely and much more beneficial to the Sixers. He mentions Ayo Dosunmu and Herb Jones, but the guy that I really like is Malik Beasley. And if I was the Sixers right now and the mentality was to go all in and try to upgrade this team right now, I think Malik Beasley makes the most sense. And hear me out as to why. Malik Beasley is on one of the best contracts in the NBA this season. He is making $6 million on a 1-year deal. I was surprised when he signed that deal, especially for what he was able to do with Milwaukee last year. But he's gotten even better. He's started only 8 games so far for the Pistons out of 27. He's playing about 28 minutes per game, and he's averaging 16 points per game. He's shooting 41.4% from 3 on almost 9 attempts per game. Movement shooter, a guy who can come around screens. The Sixers have had these kind of, dribble handoff specialists, right, who can find that chemistry with Joel Embiid. So if Joel can come back and be healthy, I feel like Malik Beasley could really suit that role. And he's just a sniper, man. He gives you a lot more volume in terms of three-point shooting. Sixers definitely need that. I think Malik Beasley right now would be my top trade target if they do decide to go get guys. And he's only making $6 million. That's easy to kind of fit in there. How would they make that work? Well, you'd have to look at these contracts. Keep in mind, they can't take back more than they send out, right? So they'd have to aggregate some of these smaller vets. But of course, a draft pick, some type of compensation would have to be in there. So, do you kind of sell off some of these vet pieces and, almost try to lose games to get one of those top 5-6 picks and not allow the pick to go to OKC and come back healthy next year? Do you tell Joel, just sit the rest of the season and try to get healthy? But then again, are you going to have the buy-in of that idea from Paul George and Tyrese Maxey? So it's a very complicated thing. I think it all depends on how quick Joel comes back, and they'll just have to move from there and see what happens these next couple weeks. But again, schedule gets a lot harder, a lot more back-to-backs. Things are going to turn into a gauntlet very soon, and the Sixers have to make a decision. So give me your thoughts down below. Appreciate everybody for tapping in. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.